I think there are many problems with the book, but I think, you know, the fact that it is outwardly oriented toward white white elites or white groups whose hearts and minds she thinks she can change. I think that that problem is twofold. Number one, I think that it shapes the types of solutions that you offer up, right? And it also shapes the way that you come to particular types of conclusions. And so, if it is that white people are your audience, then you have to come up with solutions that center them. And this is the great, this is the great paradox of white supremacy. On the one hand, white people are the problem, right? That Black people are subjected to racism, but the problem is a white problem. But at the same time, when you center white people as a solution, then they become sort of the central sort of answer to the problem. And this is a paradox, but if we understand that those who are racialized and those who are oppressed and those who are marginalized, number one, are the majority of the world, and number two, are the actual solution, then this is what allows us to move away from that sort of conundrum that can arise where the solution to the problem is the solution to the problem, right? And so the second problem with the book is not simply that it's geared towards white elites, but also that it centers the ideas, analysis, and understanding of Black elites, right? Again, like, so my reading of this book is that the problem with the US, with US society and what makes it a caste system is that it constantly reminds exceptional Black people of their Blackness, that no matter how much they accumulate, no matter how much they achieve, no matter how much they integrate particular spaces, they're still Black. And that's the real violence of the society, which, as we know, that's sad. It sucks, when you go to a restaurant and a waiter doesn't wait on you, or when you're Oprah and you go to buy a bag in France and people think you can't afford it. That really hurts one's feelings. But that's not the problem. That's not the structural problem that we need to be focusing on. And so it's an elite problem that has both white and Black manifestations, I would say.
Yeah, and of course we're talking about Isabel Wilkerson's Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents. Thank you very much.
I bought this paperweight.
Wow.
I bought it.
Fair enough, right? I mean, and glad you're going to be able to make some lasting use of it. But I didn't read the book, so I wanted to start with that. I've read your critique a couple of times, actually, and am familiar with sort of this, if I can call it this, a genre of books that, I mean, her book does have a genre or a class or a lineage of sorts in terms of its approach. And you talk about it in terms of this sort of, as I understood it at least, and correct me if I'm wrong, this broader tradition or struggle between talking about race, as I think you just were describing there, as disconnected from material conditions, or the, as you put here in terms of Oliver Cromwell Cox, who I want to ask you to talk about here. You say that what Cox does, sort of in contradistinction to what Wilkerson and those like her do, is to put class struggle, racial violence, and relentless political class competition at the founding of the capitalist world system starting in 1492. So could you talk a little bit more about that distinction you draw out between what Cox's tradition represents and what Wilkerson's tradition of writing about race represents in that, yeah, and what the two of them are not doing or doing in distinction from one another?
Yeah, so something that's key to Cox's analysis, and something that was in so this essay went through several drafts. But something that was in the first draft is that he focuses on the sort of the rise of the modern capitalist system in 1492. But the other thing that he does in Foundations of Capitalism is talk about these early capitalist cities. And so like Venice, Genoa, and I always forget the other one. But anyway, there's these early capitalist cities that have the characteristics that go on to constitute later capitalist societies. So like Great Britain and then the United States, right? That these become capitalist leaders. So what he argues is that, and this is sort of where he departs from Lenin, is that like it's not that imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism, it's constitutive of the capitalist system itself, because the ways in which a entity becomes the leadership of the system is through capturing foreign exchange and foreign markets, and then dominating foreign populations. That this is the sort of characteristic feature of a capitalist system, and what leads to a particular society becoming the leadership in that system. And that's important because what it shows is that capitalism is fundamentally rooted in domination, not only within nations, but among nations. And so this is why he's considered to be one of the first world. He is considered to be the progenitor of world systems theory. And so he argues that over time, racial logics develop in tandem with the rise of the capitalist system because of the ways in which these forms of dominating whole populations are endemic and constitutive of the system. So Cox argues that whereas the caste system does not start as a system of economic exploitation or a system of hierarchy rooted in domination. Now, there's contention as to whether that's a right or wrong analysis of caste prior to the rise of capitalism, that there is no system of race relations that is not exploitative and that is not fundamentally rooted in domination and subjection. And so it's simply a different, and so for him, they're simply different systems, right? Caste and race and class are different. A class system and a caste system are different, and then a race relations rooted in a class system are fundamentally different from the Indian caste system. And so to me, I read Cox and also sort of an intellectual community with people like Walter Rodney, even with people like contemporary people like Gerald Horne, people like Louise Thompson Patterson, all of my squad, which is predominantly Black communists and socialists, who are looking at the intimate links between capitalism and imperialism and between racial and class domination. So to me, these are people who take the Negro question very, very seriously and understand that this is a particular enunciation of capitalist exploitation. So that's one mode of scholarship, right? This Wilkerson mode of scholarship, number one, is descriptive. It is not analytical. There's no analytical value to it. It describes particular relations, and it's based on stories and experiences, which can be important in concretizing or in sort of giving examples of broader structural analyses, but that's not what she does. The other
because the way you describe it, that's the core of her method. It seemed. If did I read you correctly in that? Like that's it. Like she's not. There's no sort of social science at all behind it. It's just like I didn't get treated right at a restaurant or in an elevator or and I mean and that was like almost her entire method. Did I read you right? Am I getting that right?
I think she draws very heavily on those stories, and then she offers these histories, but they're not, basically what they are scenes of things that happened before, right? It's not, there's no historiography to it. There's no sort of historical arc, except they were racist then, they're racist now, Caste. That is essentially what one takes away from it. And I think that what most people enjoyed about her work is the stories, right? Because again, stories can give a sort of relatable example of whatever dynamics one is describing. But the problem is that these are not examples, they serve as the evidence, if that makes sense. And so that type of scholarship, it's focused on behavior and attitudes, right? It's focused on interpersonal relationships as important, just as important as the sort of structural dynamics, right? That the structural dynamics are indeed manifested, or they're best sort of understood through these interpersonal dynamics. So it's a different project, and it is fundamentally predicated in the belief that, like, if people gave up their privilege, if they had empathy, so empathy is big here, if they had empathy for the suffering of the oppressed, particularly the suffering of Black elites, then this would resolve the sort of racial problem that we have in the United States. The other problem with that is she equates this to sort of Nazi Germany. So there's a number of issues, but one thing we know about Nazi Germany is that was a system of extermination, right? This was not to maintain a caste order or otherwise, that this was a system of extermination. And to equate these three completely different social systems just becomes very problematic, and shows the sort of arbitrary nature in which she's just taking all forms of oppression and saying, see, all of these systems have oppression, therefore they're all caste. And that's a problem.